Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal, loneliness, or starting over when you never wanted to, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Your support means more than you know, and your stories remind me I'm not alone. After my divorce, silence became the loudest thing in my life. The house I rented was small, but even its thin walls echoed with everything that was gone. No arguments anymore, no laughter either, just the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock, and the soft ache that settled in my chest every evening when the sun went down. I was 42, freshly divorced, and starting over in a way no one ever dreams about when they say for better or worse. My ex-husband, Daniel, had moved on quickly. A younger woman, a brighter smile, a life that didn't include me or the years I thought we'd built together. I tried not to think about them, but grief has a way of sitting beside you even when you don't invite it. Money was tight. The divorce had drained my savings, and the job I worked at a local accounting office barely covered rent and groceries. Still, every Sunday evening I cooked a simple meal for myself. It was my way of pretending life still had some kind of rhythm. That night, I made a pot of chicken soup, the kind my mother used to make when I was a child. As it simmered, the smell filled the kitchen, warm and familiar, and for a moment I didn't feel so alone. It was raining hard when I heard the knock. Not a confident knock, not the kind that comes with purpose. It was soft, uneven, almost apologetic. I hesitated. No one ever came by unannounced anymore. For a split second, fear flickered through me, but loneliness has a way of pushing you forward when caution tells you to stay still. I opened the door just a crack. She stood there, soaked, small and hunched, holding a plastic bag that looked like it had seen better days. Her hair was thin and white, plastered to her head by the rain. Her coat was too big, sleeves swallowing her hands, and her shoes were worn down to nothing. She looked at me with eyes that held more years than I could imagine carrying. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice barely louder than the rain. I smelled food. Something in my chest tightened. Hunger has a look. You don't forget it once you've seen it. I'd grown up poor enough to recognize it immediately. Without thinking, I opened the door wider and told her to come inside. She hesitated, like she didn't quite believe me, then stepped in slowly, water dripping onto my floor. I handed her a towel, and she thanked me like I'd given her gold. I sat her at the small kitchen table and poured her a bowl of soup. She ate carefully at first, like she was afraid it might disappear if she moved too fast. Then her hand steadied, and she ate with quiet urgency. I watched her, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Purpose. Not the kind you write on a vision board, but the kind that comes from simply being useful to another human being. Her name was Eleanor. She told me she'd been widowed for many years and had no children nearby. Her voice was gentle, but there was a weight behind it, like she'd learned to speak softly because no one listened anymore. I didn't ask why she was out in the rain with nowhere to go. Some questions don't need answers right away. After she finished eating, I offered her another bowl, and she accepted with a shy smile. When she stood to leave, I wrapped leftovers in a container and pressed it into her hands. She tried to refuse, pride flickering in her eyes, but hunger won in the end. As she reached for the door, she stopped suddenly. Her posture changed, stiffening, like she'd heard something I couldn't. Then she turned back to me and reached out, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "Don't go home tonight," she said, her eyes locked on mine, sharp and urgent. "Promise me." I laughed softly, uncomfortable. The moment felt strange, heavy in a way I couldn't explain. "I am home," I told her gently, thinking she might be confused. Her grip tightened. "Not this house," she whispered. "Not tonight. Something bad is waiting." A chill ran through me, and for a second the room felt colder. Then logic rushed in, scolding me for even considering her words. She was tired, hungry, probably frightened by the storm. I squeezed her hand reassuringly and told her everything was fine. She searched my face, disappointment settling into her features, and slowly let go. Without another word, she pulled her coat tighter and stepped back into the rain. I locked the door and stood there for a long moment, heart racing for no good reason. I told myself I was being foolish. People say strange things all the time, especially when life has been hard on them. Still, that night I didn't sleep well. Her words echoed in my mind, mixing with the memories of my divorce, the way Daniel had packed his things without looking back, the way I'd felt like the ground under my feet wasn't solid anymore. The next morning I woke to sirens, not nearby, but close enough to make my stomach drop. I checked my phone and saw a message from my neighbor asking if I was okay. Confused, I stepped outside. Yellow tape blocked off the street 2 houses down, police cars, an ambulance, smoke still curling faintly from a window. A gas leak, they said, an explosion during the night. The house directly opposite mine had been destroyed. My legs went weak as the realization hit me. If the wind had shifted, if the timing had been different, if I'd gone to bed earlier. I thought of Eleanor's hand gripping mine, her voice trembling with urgency. I sat down on the curb, shaking, tears streaming down my face as the weight of what almost happened crushed me. Kindness had led her to my door, and that same kindness had delivered a warning I didn't understand until it was almost too late. I spent the rest of the day trying to find her. I walked the nearby streets, checked the small park where people sometimes slept, asked at the soup kitchen. No one knew her name. No one had seen her. It was like she had vanished into the rain she came from. That night, I didn't cook. I sat in the quiet, holding on to the container I had given her, now empty and clean, and cried for a woman who had saved me without ever knowing if I believed her. I didn't understand it then, but that night changed something in me. It cracked open the shell I'd built around my heart since the divorce. It reminded me that even when life strips everything away, moments of grace still find us. Sometimes they come wrapped in rags, knocking softly on your door, asking only for a bowl of soup. I didn't tell anyone what happened that night. Not my coworkers, not my sister who lived 2 states away, not even the neighbor who kept checking in on me with concerned eyes and casseroles I'd barely touched. How do you explain that a hungry old woman knocked on your door, ate your soup, and warned you away from disaster like some quiet guardian you weren't meant to question? The words felt fragile, like they would crumble under the weight of someone else's doubt. So I kept them to myself, turning them over and over in my mind as I went back to work, back to routine, back to pretending my life hadn't almost ended without me even knowing it. But something in me had shifted. The numbness that followed my divorce had cracked, letting feelings seep back in, slowly and painfully. I found myself looking at people differently. I noticed the woman who always sat alone on the bus, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. I noticed the man outside the grocery store whose sign said, "Anything helps, God bless," his eyes tired but hopeful. I noticed how close we all were to one bad day, one wrong turn, one moment of being unseen. And I noticed how one small act of kindness could ripple outward in ways we never understand. I went back to the soup kitchen where I'd asked about Eleanor, this time not just to look for her, but to volunteer. The first day I felt awkward, unsure of my place, but the work grounded me. Chopping vegetables, washing dishes, serving food. It was simple, honest labor. No spreadsheets, no pretending, just people feeding people. I kept my eyes open, half expecting to see Eleanor sitting quietly at one of the tables, smiling that shy smile at me. She never appeared. Still, I kept going back. Weeks passed, then months. The seasons changed, and with them, something in me began to heal. I started sleeping better. I started laughing again, surprising myself with the sound. The anger toward Daniel softened, not because what he'd done hurt any less, but because I was tired of carrying it. One afternoon, while sorting donations, I found an old coat, heavy and worn, but clean. It reminded me of Eleanor's, sleeves too long, fabric faded with time. I pressed it to my chest and cried right there among the boxes, grieving a woman I barely knew and a version of myself that had needed saving more than I'd realized. Then, one evening, as I was leaving the soup kitchen, I saw her. She was standing across the street, thinner than I remembered, leaning on a cane I hadn't seen before. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, pulling her image from memory because I wanted to see her again so badly. But then she looked up, and our eyes met. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by something like relief. "Eleanor," I said, my voice breaking as I crossed the street. She smiled, soft and tired. "You listened," she said, like it was a statement, not a question. "I didn't," I admitted, reaching for her hand. "Not really, but I should have thanked you. You saved my life." She squeezed my fingers gently. "No," she said, "you saved your own. I just reminded you to pay attention." We sat together on a bench nearby. She told me she'd been moved into temporary housing after a fall had landed her in the hospital. She spoke without bitterness, just facts, like she'd learned long ago that anger only made the road heavier. I told her about the explosion, about how close it had been, about the guilt that still gnawed at me for not believing her fully. She listened, nodding, eyes kind. "Sometimes," she said slowly, "we hear what we're ready to hear. That night, you were ready enough." Before we parted, I asked her why she'd come to my door. Of all the houses on that street, why mine? She looked at me for a long moment, then shrugged. She looked like someone who would open it, she said simply. I watched her walk away, leaning on her cane, disappearing into the crowd. That was the last time I saw Eleanor. But she didn't leave me, not really. Her presence lingered in the choices I made, the way I kept my door a little wider, my heart a little softer. The divorce no longer felt like the end of my story. It felt like a turning point I hadn't understood at the time. Years later, I moved out of that house. I remarried eventually, not out of fear of being alone, but out of a quiet confidence I'd earned the hard way. On my last night there, I made a pot of chicken soup, the same recipe, and stood by the door for a long time listening to the rain. No one knocked. Still, I left a bowl outside, just in case. Because I learned something Eleanor never said out loud. We're all hungry for something. Safety, love, to be seen. And sometimes the most ordinary acts, the ones we almost don't do, are the ones that save us. After Eleanor disappeared from my life the second time, I thought that would be the end of it. A strange, sacred chapter I'd carry quietly, like a pressed flower tucked between the pages of a book no one else ever read. But healing doesn't work like that. It doesn't close doors neatly. It opens others you didn't even know were there. And sometimes it pushes you straight through them, whether you feel ready or not. Volunteering at the soup kitchen became more than a habit. It became a place where I could breathe. On weeknights after work, when the office lights felt too bright and the silence of my rented house felt too loud, I'd drive there instead. I learned names. I learned stories. I learned how easily dignity slips away when life keeps taking and taking without giving back. And in listening to other people's pain, something unexpected happened. My own began to loosen its grip. One evening, a woman named Marla sat across from me during cleanup. She was around my age, maybe a few years older, with tired eyes and a laugh that sounded like it had been buried for a long time. She told me she was recently divorced too. Her husband had left after 23 years, said he wanted something different, as if a life could be exchanged like a pair of shoes that didn't fit anymore. I felt my chest tighten with recognition. We didn't trade details. We didn't need to. Pain recognizes pain without introductions. "You ever feel like you disappeared?" she asked me quietly, wiping down a table. "All the time," I said, "like I'm a ghost in my own life." She nodded like I'd just said something important. That night, I cried in my car before driving home, not because I felt weak, but because for the first time since the divorce, I didn't feel strange for hurting. I wasn't broken, I was grieving. There's a difference, and it matters. Around that time, Daniel reached out. His name lit up my phone on a Tuesday afternoon, and my heart reacted before my mind could catch up. My hand shook as I stared at the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it ring, protecting the fragile peace I'd built. But something steadier inside me answered instead. He sounded nervous, awkward, like a man who wasn't sure of his place anymore. He asked how I was doing, told me he'd been thinking about me, said things hadn't turned out the way he expected. I listened without interrupting, surprised by how calm I felt. The anger I'd rehearsed in my head for months never showed up. When he finished, there was a pause, heavy with everything we'd lost. "I hope you're okay," I told him honestly. There was relief in his sigh. "I'm sorry," he said finally. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't poetic, it was late, but it was real. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, letting the quiet settle. Forgiveness didn't come all at once, it never does. But that night, I realized I didn't need him to carry my healing anymore. I could hold it myself. The following winter was harsh. Snow piled up along the streets, and the cold seemed to press into everything, even bones. I worried about Eleanor more than I probably should have. I asked around again, checked shelters, asked social workers at the kitchen. No one had news. Eventually, I had to accept that some people are meant to pass through your life like messages, not stay like chapters. Then, one afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name written in shaky handwriting. Inside was a simple card, no fancy design, just plain white folded carefully. The note inside was short. "You opened your door when you didn't have to. That matters more than you know. Keep it open. E." I sat on the floor and cried like the world had finally exhaled. She was alive, somewhere, still watching the world with those sharp, knowing eyes, still believing in small goodness. I taped the note inside a kitchen cabinet where I'd see it every time I reached for a bowl. Life didn't magically become easy after that. Healing isn't a straight line. There were days the loneliness crept back in, whispering doubts late at night. There were moments when I missed the life I thought I'd have, the future I'd planned so carefully, only to watch it fall apart. But now when those thoughts came, they didn't own me. They passed through, like weather. I started taking better care of myself, not in the dramatic overhaul your life way people like to post online, just small things. Walking in the mornings, cooking real meals, saying no when I needed to, saying yes when it scared me just enough to feel alive. I moved from that rental house into a brighter apartment closer to the park. On moving day, I paused at the door before leaving for the last time, running my hand along the frame where Eleanor had stood, rain-soaked and hungry, carrying a warning I hadn't understood yet. That night, I'd learned something profound. Safety isn't just locked doors and routines. It's awareness. It's connection. It's listening when the world whispers instead of waiting for it to scream. Months later, at a small community fundraiser for the soup kitchen, I met Thomas. He wasn't flashy. He didn't try to impress me. He asked thoughtful questions and listened to the answers. When I told him about volunteering, his eyes softened, like kindness made sense to him. We talked for hours that night, not about grand dreams, but about ordinary things. Books we loved, mistakes we'd made, the strange ways life redirects you when you're sure you're lost. I didn't rush it. I'd learned too much to confuse loneliness with love. But slowly, carefully, something real grew. Trust, laughter, peace. And every time I felt fear rise up, warning me not to risk my heart again, I thought of Eleanor's hand gripping mine, urgent, protective, loving in its own way. Sometimes warnings come disguised as strangers, sometimes salvation smells like chicken soup, and sometimes the worst endings carve space for the most unexpected beginnings. I don't know where Eleanor is now. I don't know if she's still walking this world or watching from somewhere just beyond it, but I carry her with me in the way I live, in the way I open doors, in the way I trust quiet instincts, in the way I believe that even after divorce, after loss, after nights when you think you're completely alone, grace still finds you. It always does. Time has a strange way of testing the lessons we think we've learned. Just when you believe you've found your footing, life nudges you again, not to knock you down, but to see if you'll walk forward differently this time. That's what the year after meeting Thomas felt like. Gentle, mostly kind, but full of quiet moments that asked me who I really was now. Thomas and I took things slowly. Pain teaches patience if you let it. We didn't rush into labels or shared keys. We met for coffee after my volunteer shifts, walked through the park near my apartment, talked about our days in ways that felt refreshingly ordinary. He knew about my divorce, about how it had hollowed me out before slowly filling me back in. I didn't tell him about Eleanor right away. That story felt sacred, like something you only share when you know someone will hold it gently. One evening, as we sat on my small balcony watching the sun slip behind the buildings, he asked me why I volunteered so much. Not in an accusatory way, just curious. I took a deep breath and told him everything. The divorce, the loneliness, the rainy night, the old woman with hungry eyes and a warning that saved my life. I watched his face carefully, waiting for disbelief or polite skepticism. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Some people are meant to be messengers." His voice was steady, respectful. "And some people are meant to listen." In that moment, I knew I could trust him. Around that same time, my sister called with news that unsettled me more than I expected. Our mother's health was declining. Nothing dramatic at first, just forgetfulness, missed appointments, a softness creeping into her once sharp independence. I hadn't lived near her in years, and guilt rose up fast and heavy. Divorce had pulled me inward. Survival had made me selfish in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged. I started visiting more often. Long drives, they gave me too much time to think. Sitting at her kitchen table, watching her hands shake as she poured tea, hearing her tell the same story twice in one afternoon, laughing it off like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. It was the slow unraveling of a woman who had once been my anchor. One afternoon, as I was helping her sort through old photographs, she pulled out a faded picture of me as a child. I was missing 2 front teeth, grinning like the world was safe and simple. "You were always kind," she said softly, "even when it cost you." Her words hit me harder than she knew. Kindness had cost me, my marriage in some ways. I'd given and given until there was nothing left, mistaking endurance for love. Eleanor's warning echoed in my mind again, layered with new meaning. Not all danger announces itself loudly. Sometimes it hides behind familiarity. When my mother eventually needed more care than I could give on weekend visits, we made the difficult decision to move her into assisted living. The day we packed up her house felt like a quiet funeral. Rooms emptied of echoes, lives condensed into boxes. As we loaded the last one into my car, I found a small notebook tucked into a drawer. Inside were prayers she'd written over the years, names, dates, worries, gratitude, and there, on one page, my name written again and again. I cried the whole drive home. That night, I dreamed of Eleanor. She stood in the doorway of my old rental house, rain falling behind her, but she was dry this time, stronger, smiling. She didn't speak, she just nodded, like she was reminding me of something I already knew. Grief returned in waves after that, not the sharp, drowning kind from my divorce, but a softer, deeper ache, the kind that hums beneath your days. I leaned into volunteering even more. I found comfort in routine, in showing up, in making sure no one went unseen if I could help it. One cold evening, a man about my father's age sat across from me at the soup kitchen. His hand shook as he held his spoon. He barely ate. When I asked if he was okay, he looked up with eyes full of fear and said, "I don't want to go back." The words froze me. Memories flooded back so fast I felt dizzy. Eleanor's grip, her warning, "Don't go home tonight." "What's waiting for you there?" I asked gently. He swallowed hard. "Anger," he said, "and I don't trust myself anymore." I didn't hesitate. I contacted a coordinator. We found him a safe place for the night, resources, support. As he left, he squeezed my hand the same way Eleanor had squeezed mine years before. Desperate, grateful, alive. I sat alone after closing, hands trembling, heart pounding. The circle felt complete in a way I couldn't explain. Warnings passed on, kindness multiplied, lives nudged back from edges no one else could see. That was the night I fully understood the moral Eleanor had never spoken out loud. Being kind isn't about being nice. It's about being brave enough to act when something feels wrong. It's about listening to the quiet warnings inside you, the ones that tell you when to open a door and when to step back. Thomas and I moved in together the following spring, slowly, thoughtfully, with conversations instead of assumptions. On our first night in the new place, we cooked chicken soup. He laughed when I insisted on it, not knowing why it mattered so much. We ate at a small table, light streaming through the windows, and for the first time in years, home felt like something I was building, not something I was recovering from. I still think about Eleanor often, when I pass someone hungry, when someone knocks unexpectedly, when fear whispers instead of shouts. Her warning didn't just save my life that night, it reshaped how I live it. Because sometimes the greatest danger isn't what's waiting outside your door, it's what happens when you stop listening to the quiet voices trying to protect you. And sometimes the greatest gift you'll ever receive comes from feeding someone who has nothing left to give, except the truth. By the time spring settled fully into our lives, I realized how different my days felt from the ones I used to survive instead of live. Mornings no longer arrived like challenges I had to brace myself against. They came quietly, with light filtering through the curtains, with Thomas humming as he made coffee, with the simple comfort of knowing I wasn't walking through my life unseen anymore. But even in peace, echoes remain. Healing doesn't erase what shaped you. It teaches you how to carry it without letting it cut you open. Thomas noticed those echoes before I ever pointed them out. He noticed how I paused before opening the door when someone knocked unexpectedly, how I always checked the stove twice before bed, how I listened closely to tone and silence, not just words. One evening, as we cleaned up after dinner, he gently asked, "Do you still feel like something bad could happen at any moment?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. "Not bad," I said finally, "just important, like life is always trying to tell us something and most people are too busy to hear it." He nodded, accepting that answer without trying to fix it. That was one of the reasons I loved him. He didn't rush my scars. He respected them. That summer, I received another letter. This one came from the assisted living facility where my mother now lived. She had taken a fall. Not life-threatening, they assured me, but enough to remind us how fragile time really is. I drove there immediately, heart pounding the entire way. When I reached her room, she was sitting up in bed, embarrassed more than hurt. "I'm sorry to worry you," she said, like she was the one comforting me. I sat beside her, holding her hand, feeling the thinness of her skin, the way age had softened her grip. "You never have to apologize for needing help," I told her. I realized then how much that sentence applied to my own life, too, how long I'd believed needing help meant failure. Eleanor had shattered that belief the moment she knocked on my door. As weeks passed, my mother grew quieter. Some days she was sharp and present, other days she drifted, calling me by my sister's name or asking about my father who had been gone for years. Each visit chipped away at me in small, unseen ways. I started bringing her soup from home. Chicken soup, always chicken soup. It became our ritual. She'd smile when she smelled it, even on days when words escaped her. One afternoon, as she ate slowly, she looked up at me and said, "You're safe now." There was no context, no explanation, just certainty. Tears blurred my vision. I didn't ask how she knew. I didn't ask what she meant. I simply nodded. I am. And for the first time, I believed it fully. Not long after that, the soup kitchen announced funding cuts. Programs would be reduced, hours shortened, people turned away earlier than before. The news hit me harder than I expected. Faces flashed through my mind, names, stories, warnings that had been caught just in time. I felt helpless in a way that echoed my divorce all over again. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I opened my door. Thomas helped me set up a small community meal once a week in our apartment building's shared space. Word spread quietly. No signs, no announcements, just neighbors telling neighbors. People came with dishes, with folding chairs, with children tugging at their sleeves. Some came hungry, some came lonely, some came curious. All were welcome. On the first night, as I stirred a massive pot of soup, steam rising like a blessing, I felt Eleanor's presence so strongly it made my chest ache. This was the ripple she'd started, one bowl leading to another, one open door teaching others not to lock theirs so tightly. Halfway through the evening, a young woman stood awkwardly near the doorway. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her eyes darted around the room, unsure, guarded. I recognized that look instantly. It was the same one I'd worn after my divorce, the look of someone who doesn't trust kindness yet. I approached her slowly. "You're welcome here," I said softly. She hesitated, then nodded. "I didn't know where else to go tonight," she admitted. I handed her a bowl of soup. Our fingers brushed, and she flinched like she expected something to be taken from her instead of given. She ate quickly, eyes filling with tears she tried desperately to hide. I sat with her without asking questions. Silence, I'd learned, can be a form of safety, too. Later, as she prepared to leave, she turned back and said, "Thank you for not asking me anything." I smiled gently. Sometimes food is enough. That night, after everyone had gone home, I stood alone in the quiet room, folding chairs, wiping tables, my body tired but my spirit full. I thought about how close I'd come to shutting myself off forever after my divorce, how easily bitterness could have hardened me, how different my life would be if I hadn't opened my door on that rainy night. Loss teaches you what matters if you let it. Divorce taught me independence, Eleanor taught me awareness, my mother taught me tenderness, and love, in its quiet, persistent way, taught me that safety isn't the absence of danger, it's the presence of connection. Months later, as autumn returned, Thomas proposed to me in the least dramatic way possible. No crowd, no spectacle, just a quiet walk, leaves crunching underfoot, his voice steady but nervous as he asked me to build a life with him. I said yes with tears streaming down my face, not because I needed saving, but because I wanted partnership. There's a difference, and it's everything. On our wedding day, I left an empty chair in the back row. No name, no explanation, just a quiet acknowledgement of the woman who had changed my life with nothing more than hunger, honesty, and a warning whispered in the rain. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never opened that door, if I'd ignored the knock, if fear had won. The thought still chills me. But then I remind myself that I did open it, that I listened, that I learned. And now, whenever I hear a knock, literal or emotional, I pause, I listen. because I know this for certain now. The world is always speaking. Grace is always passing by, and sometimes the most important moments of your life arrive looking like someone else's need. Planning a wedding at my age wasn't something I ever imagined doing again, not because I'd lost faith in love, but because I'd learned how easily plans can become promises life never intends to keep. This time, there were no grand expectations, no pressure to impress. Thomas and I wanted something simple, honest, a day that felt like us, not a performance of who we thought we were supposed to be. Still, even simplicity carries memories. Each decision tugged at the past in unexpected ways. Choosing flowers reminded me of my first wedding bouquet, how I'd held it so tightly my hands cramped. Picking music brought back the echo of a dance floor I'd once believed would last forever. I let the memories come. I didn't push them away. They were part of me, but they no longer defined me. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes for something borrowed, I found the coat Eleanor had worn that night, or at least one just like it. Heavy, brown, sleeves too long. I didn't remember keeping it, but there it was, folded neatly at the bottom of a box labeled kitchen. I sat on the floor, coat in my lap, heart pounding. Logic told me it couldn't be the same one. I'd never taken it from her, but my hands shook as I held it anyway. Inside the pocket was a small scrap of paper, just one line, written in the same shaky handwriting as the card she'd sent me years ago. Doors open both ways. I pressed the coat to my chest and sobbed, not from fear, from gratitude, from the deep, aching understanding that some connections don't obey time or logic. They arrive, they change you, and they leave pieces of themselves behind so you're never quite the same. I wore that coat on my wedding day, not over my dress, but wrapped around my shoulders during a quiet moment alone before the ceremony. It grounded me, reminded me of where I'd been, of who I was choosing to be now. The wedding itself was small. Friends from the soup kitchen, neighbors from the building, my sister, my mother, frail but smiling, sitting in the front row. When Thomas and I exchanged vows, I didn't promise forever like I had the first time. I promised honesty, presence, the courage to listen even when the truth was uncomfortable. He promised the same. It felt stronger than any grand declaration I'd ever made. Afterward, as laughter filled the room and plates clinked softly, an older woman approached me. I didn't recognize her, but something about her posture, her eyes, made my breath catch. She took my hands gently and said, "You did good." "Do I know you?" I asked, heart racing. She smiled kindly. "No," she said, "but I know what it looks like when someone learns to live with their heart open." I watched her walk away, disappearing into the crowd before I could say another word. I never saw her again, but I felt the echo of Eleanor in her presence like a reminder that the world is full of quiet witnesses. Marriage the second time around was different, quieter, deeper. Thomas didn't try to fill the cracks in me, he honored them. We built routines that felt like shelter instead of cages. Morning coffee, evening walks, weekly dinners where soup was almost always on the menu no matter the season. My mother passed away the following spring, peacefully, in her sleep. The grief was heavy but gentle, like a blanket instead of a wave. At her memorial, I read a passage from her prayer notebook. I didn't explain where it came from, I just let her words speak for themselves. Afterward, as people hugged me and shared memories, I felt her presence not as loss, but as continuity. Love doesn't end, it transforms. In the months that followed, our community meals grew. What started as a response to funding cuts became a rhythm of its own. People brought their children, their parents, their stories. Strangers became familiar. Loneliness softened in the warmth of shared tables. I watched connections form the same way mine had, with no agenda, just openness. One night, as I was cleaning up, a teenage boy lingered behind. He couldn't meet my eyes. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets. "Do you have to leave?" he asked quietly. "Not yet," I said, setting the sponge down. He swallowed hard. "I don't want to go home." The words landed heavy, familiar. My heart ached, but my voice stayed steady. I told him, "You don't have to explain anything right now, but you don't have to face it alone either." We found him help, resources, a safe place, and as he left, he turned back and said, "How did you know what to do?" I thought of Eleanor, of warnings whispered, of doors opened. I said, "I listened," simply. Late that night, after everyone was gone and the building was quiet, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. Rain tapped softly against the glass, the same sound that had once accompanied a stranger to my door. I closed my eyes and whispered a thank you into the dark. Life after divorce had felt like wandering through ruins at first, but ruins make space for new foundations, and sometimes the strongest ones are built not with certainty, but with trust. Trust that kindness matters, trust that warnings are gifts, trust that feeding someone who is hungry, whether for food, safety, or understanding, can change everything. I don't know what tomorrow holds. None of us do. But I know this. I will keep my door open. I will keep listening. And I will keep believing that the quiet moments, the ones most people rush past, are often the ones that save us. Because once, on a rainy night, I fed a hungry old woman, and she gave me my life back. After my mother's passing, the world felt quieter in a way that was hard to explain. Not emptier exactly, just softer, like someone had turned the volume down on everything that used to clamor for attention. Grief settled into me like a low hum instead of a scream. I learned to live alongside it, the way you live with a scar that aches when the weather changes but no longer bleeds. Thomas gave me space without withdrawing. That balance is rare. He understood that some evenings I needed to talk about my mother, about the way her laugh used to fill a room, about the prayers written in her careful hand. Other nights I needed silence and soup and the comfort of knowing someone was there without asking anything of me. Love, I learned again, doesn't demand, it witnesses. The community dinners continued, even as seasons shifted and life tried to pull us in different directions. They became something people relied on, not just for food, but for familiarity, for faces that remembered your name, for a place where you could sit down without explaining yourself. I watched people change over time, shoulders straightening, laughter coming easier. Some disappeared, hopefully into better chapters. Others stayed, becoming part of the fabric of our lives. One evening, a woman named Ruth joined us. She was in her late 60s, sharp-tongued but warm underneath it. With silver hair she wore pulled back tight, like she didn't trust it to behave otherwise. She volunteered to help serve and never stopped talking when she started. At first, I thought she was just lonely. Later, I realized she was grieving too. "My husband used to cook," she told me as we washed dishes side by side. "I never learned. Then he died, and suddenly I was hungry all the time. Not just for food." Her words echoed something deep inside me. Hunger takes many forms. I handed her a towel and smiled. "You're doing great," I said. She sniffed, pretending not to care, but her eyes softened. That night, after everyone had left, Ruth lingered. She looked around the empty room and said, "You've built something important here." I shook my head, uncomfortable with praise. "No," I said, "we built it." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded like she'd seen something she approved of. A few weeks later, Ruth didn't show up. Then another week passed. Something in my chest tightened. I called the number she'd scribbled on a scrap of paper one night, just in case. No answer. I tried again the next day. Still nothing. The familiar unease crept in, the one Eleanor had taught me not to ignore. I drove to the address Ruth had mentioned casually in conversation, a small, aging apartment building on the edge of town. The manager recognized her name immediately. He said she fell, then in the hospital, no family nearby. I found her 2 days later, sitting upright in a narrow hospital bed, angry more than hurt. "I told them I was fine," she snapped when she saw me. "Didn't need all this fuss." I pulled a chair close and took her hand anyway. "You matter," I said quietly, "even when you don't feel like explaining yourself." She looked away, blinking fast. After a moment, her grip tightened around my fingers. "No one's ever come looking for me before," she said. The admission was small, but devastating. I visited Ruth every day until she was discharged. Then I helped her back into her apartment, stocked her fridge, taught her how to make the soup she'd come to love. Chicken soup, of course. As I stirred the pot in her kitchen, steam rising, I felt that same sense of rightness I'd felt the first night Eleanor crossed my threshold. This was the work. Not dramatic, not heroic, just showing up. Later that year, Thomas and I faced our own quiet test. He was offered a job in another city, a good opportunity, the kind you don't dismiss lightly, but it meant leaving the community we'd built, the routines that anchored us, the place where so much healing had taken root. We talked about it for weeks. Long walks, late nights, honest fears. I was afraid of starting over again, afraid of losing momentum, afraid that the open door I'd worked so hard to keep open might close if we moved too far away. One night, as rain tapped against the windows, Thomas took my hands and said, "What if the door isn't the place?" I looked at him, confused. "What if it's you?" he continued. "What if wherever you are, the door is open because you are?" The truth of it landed slowly, settling into me like warmth. Eleanor hadn't saved me because of a house. My mother hadn't felt safe because of a room. Safety had followed me because I'd learned how to create it. We moved. It wasn't easy. Goodbyes rarely are. The last community dinner in that building felt like a chapter closing. There were hugs, promises to stay in touch, tears I didn't try to hide. Ruth came, leaning on her cane, eyes bright. She pressed something in my hand as we hugged. Later, in the quiet of our empty apartment, I opened it. It was a small wooden sign, hand-carved, the words simple and uneven. "Come in." I smiled through tears and packed it carefully. Our new city was louder, faster, less forgiving at first. I felt untethered for a while, like a transplant struggling to take root. But habits are powerful things. I found a local shelter, started volunteering, learned names again, built trust slowly, hung the sign by our new front door. One evening, months after the move, there was a knock, soft, uneven. My heart skipped, muscle memory surging before reason caught up. I opened the door to find a man about my age, soaked from the rain, eyes wary. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I think I've got the wrong place. I smelled food." I glanced back at the pot simmering on the stove. Chicken soup. Always chicken soup. I smiled gently and stepped aside. "Come in," I said. "You look hungry." As he sat at our table, warming his hands around the bowl, I felt Eleanor's presence so clearly it was like she was standing just behind me. Not as a ghost, as a reminder. "This is how it works," she seemed to say. "One door, one warning, one life touching another. And the story keeps going." The man who knocked that night stayed for 2 bowls of soup and 1 quiet hour. He didn't tell me much, and I didn't ask. By now, I understood that sometimes people don't come to your door for answers. They come for a pause, for warmth, for proof that the world hasn't completely hardened against them. When he left, he thanked me 3 times, each one softer than the last, like he was afraid gratitude might wear out if he used it too much. After the door closed, Thomas wrapped his arms around me from behind and rested his chin on my shoulder. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, and I was. Not shaken, not afraid, just aware, the way you feel when something familiar circles back into your life, not to test you, but to confirm that you've learned the lesson it came to teach. That was when I finally understood something I'd been circling around for years. Eleanor hadn't just warned me not to go home that night. She'd warned me not to close myself off to the world, even after it hurt me. Divorce had tempted me to shrink. Loss had tempted me to retreat. Fear had whispered that safety lived behind locked doors and lowered expectations. But that wasn't true. Safety, real safety, came from connection, from paying attention, from listening when something inside you says, slow down, look closer, open up, or step away. Life settled into a rhythm in the new city. Different streets, different faces, same quiet purpose. The shelter eventually asked if I'd help coordinate volunteers. I said yes, surprised by how natural it felt to step into a role I never would have imagined for myself years ago. I wasn't leading because I needed control. I was leading because I knew how it felt to be lost, and I recognized the paths back. Thomas thrived in his new job, but he never let work eclipse what mattered. We guarded our evenings, we cooked together, we talked about our days in ways that were honest, not performative. When disagreements came, we faced them instead of burying them under politeness. That alone felt revolutionary compared to the marriage I'd once survived instead of lived. Every Sunday, without fail, we made soup. Sometimes chicken, sometimes lentil, sometimes whatever we had. And every Sunday, we left an extra container on the porch. Not for anyone specific, just as an invitation, a habit, a quiet promise to the world that this door was still open. Years passed, not dramatically, just steadily. I watched myself age without panic for the first time. Lines formed on my face, but they felt earned. I watched Thomas go gray at the temples and found it comforting instead of frightening. Time no longer felt like something stealing from me. It felt like something I was finally participating in. One afternoon, while cleaning out a hallway closet, I found the wooden "Come In" sign Ruth had given me. I realized it had never made it onto the wall in the new house. It had stayed tucked away, safe but unseen. I ran my fingers over the uneven letters and smiled. Some invitations don't need to be visible to work. Still, I hung it beside the door that day. That evening, I dreamed of my mother. She was standing at a stove I didn't recognize, stirring a pot, humming softly. Eleanor sat at the table, hands folded, watching her with a knowing smile. They didn't speak to me. They didn't need to. I woke up with tears on my pillow and peace in my chest. As I grew older, I noticed people began to come to me with their worries the way they once came to my mother, quietly, tentatively. Neighbors, volunteers, strangers who somehow sensed I wouldn't rush them, wouldn't dismiss them, wouldn't panic at their fear. I didn't have answers most of the time, but I had presence, and that turned out to be enough more often than not. One winter evening, a young couple knocked on my door. Their car had broken down. Snow was coming down hard. They were embarrassed to ask for help. I let them in without hesitation, wrapped them in blankets, fed them soup. As they sat together on the couch, whispering, I saw my younger self reflected in their uncertainty. Not the pain, but the vulnerability of needing something you can't provide for yourself in that moment. After they left safely, Thomas looked at me and said, "You know, you don't even think about it anymore. You just open the door." He was right. Fear no longer debated with instinct. Kindness no longer felt like a risk calculation. It felt like muscle memory, like breathing. On the anniversary of the night Eleanor first knocked, I began a quiet ritual. I don't mark it on a calendar. I don't announce it. I simply make soup, light a candle, and sit for a while in the quiet. I remember the rain, the grip of her hand, the warning that sounded strange until it wasn't. I think about how easily I could have ignored the knock, how close I came to believing my pain made me exempt from other people's needs. That ritual reminds me that moments don't announce their importance ahead of time. They arrive disguised as interruptions, as inconveniences, as requests we're tempted to decline because we're tired, guarded, or afraid. But every now and then, one of those moments carries a message meant just for you. I never saw Eleanor again, not in the flesh, but I see her everywhere, in the way people hesitate before asking for help, in the relief that washes over them when someone says yes, in the warnings passed quietly from one human heart to another, not through prophecy or magic, but through attention. After divorce, I thought my story was about loss, about betrayal, about rebuilding from ashes I never asked for. And it was for a while, but it turned out my story was really about listening, about learning when to open my door and when to step back, about understanding that survival is not the same as living. The night Eleanor warned me not to go home didn't just save me from an explosion, it saved me from becoming someone closed off, bitter, unreachable. It taught me that kindness isn't naive, it's perceptive. It notices danger before it becomes disaster. It recognizes hunger before it turns into despair. If you're listening to this and you've been hurt, disappointed, or stripped down by life in ways you never planned for, I want you to hear this clearly. Your pain does not disqualify you from connection. Your fear does not make you weak. And your kindness, even when it feels small or risky, matters more than you can possibly know. Sometimes the warning you need comes from someone unexpected. Sometimes the miracle you're waiting for arrives hungry. And sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is open the door when everything in you wants to stay safe and silent. I fed a hungry old woman after my divorce, and because of her, I learned how to live.